Welcome to Midnight Confessions. You found us. Real people. Real stories. The kind that make you check your locks twice. These aren't fake ghost stories. They're confessions from people who saw something they shouldn't have. Heard footsteps in empty houses. Woke up with bruises they can't explain. Still here? Each story gets darker. The woman who found handprints on her ceiling. The guy whose reflection moved first. The kid who drew the man in his closet before anyone mentioned the murder. Which one will mess you up the most? Subscribe before something finds you first. New confessions every week. Don't watch alone. My maternal uncle decided to construct a residence in what was previously an isolated rural location. By this stage, he had completed what resembled a compact entertainment space designed for gatherings. No sleeping quarters, simply one enormous dining table, a cooking area, a restroom, and a sofa all within a single room. This structure, notably, was constructed almost completely from transparent glass panels. This detail becomes crucial. It will become clearer shortly. Directly adjacent to this location, he was constructing a significantly larger residence. Nevertheless, he completed what would become his bedroom first on the second level, while the main floor remained incomplete for an extended period. My mother and I would rest in that upstairs bedroom, while the lower level stayed secured with wooden planks. That represented our only security measure we could rely upon. One evening, nearly 12 months following my grandmother's death, she had cherished this location deeply. This was actually one of the primary reasons my maternal uncle purchased this property and constructed a home here originally. We found ourselves seated outdoors, my mother and myself, on the veranda of this unfinished dwelling. Our plan for that evening involved playing a word game called Scrabble. Just like every other evening, considering we were by ourselves, my maternal uncle was away on holiday, my father was at work, and my brother stayed with our relatives at their residence for the summer season. We arranged the table for our game and positioned the board properly. After we were prepared, we began selecting some tiles randomly to begin our match. I'm uncertain whether the regulations remain identical everywhere, but to commence playing, we required 7 letters, something we accomplished without looking, relaxing while conversing with my mother. She never examined her tiles while chatting, but was instinctively arranging them before looking at them to consider what word to form. My first language is German, so I'll clarify what happens next so everyone can comprehend. When my mother finally looked down at her letters, her face went pale and she immediately ceased speaking. When I inquired what was troubling her, she revealed her tiles to me and the word Vorsichtig stared back at me. Keep in mind, this term means danger or beware in German. My mother hadn't created this word intentionally. She never glanced at her tiles during our conversation. We both fell silent, unable to look away from it. I previously mentioned my grandmother earlier. The reality is that since her passing, we've all experienced some inexplicable incidents at this location. It feels as though she has remained present around this house since her departure. What occurred in that moment seemed like another one of these supernatural encounters. What was she attempting to alert us about? We instantly became watchful, focusing more carefully on our environment. My maternal uncle's property lacked any fencing, and ahead of us flowed a stream, which contained very little water at that time, due to insufficient rainfall. Beyond that waterway, the hills rose up. Following what seemed like several minutes, we detected footsteps approaching from our front, which naturally caused us to startle in our chairs. The space before us remained quite dim, since this house possessed no floodlights or any type of powerful illumination for us to observe what was occurring in the darkness. "Is anyone out there?" My mom shouted into the night. That's when we heard it, a man's voice cutting through the silence. "Please don't be alarmed, ma'am. I mean no harm." From the path leading toward the riverbank, a figure emerged from the shadows. This stranger looked disheveled, wearing tattered clothes, with a worn satchel slung across his body. Let me paint you the picture of where we were staying. This mountain retreat was notorious for attracting what locals called free spirits, people who chose to live off the grid in makeshift shelters and mountain camps, often experimenting with various mind-altering substances. While we'd heard whispers of their presence, stories of aggressive encounters or home invasions weren't common back then. That was about to change. The stranger moved closer to our porch. As my mother positioned herself defensively at the front of our deck, he made his request, "I've been traveling for hours and I'm starving. Could you spare some bread?" Without hesitation, my mom grabbed a bag of baked goods from our game table and met him halfway down our steps. In the dim porch light, we could finally make out his features as he approached the tree where she'd hung the food. "Would it be possible to get some water as well?" he asked politely. She returned to fetch an empty container, filling it from the nearby outdoor spigot while keeping us in her line of sight. That's when this man's attention shifted directly to me. I was only 11, but growing up in a rough neighborhood had taught me to be fearless rather than frightened. My maternal uncle always kept a large blade nearby for clearing vegetation and cutting back overgrown branches. I instinctively reached for it. When my mother approached with the water bottle, the stranger's demeanor shifted completely. His next words still send chills through my entire body. "So it's just you two ladies here tonight." Even now, recounting this moment gives me the same terrifying goosebumps I experienced that evening. I felt an ice-cold sensation race down my back after those words left his mouth. The man gave me one final, lingering look before vanishing back into the night. My mother, no longer able to hide her anxiety, urgently told me to get inside my maternal uncle's small party cabin immediately. We secured the main entrance and barricaded the side door with furniture. Since we had no vehicle, we were completely stranded. The neighboring properties were all vacant. I positioned myself near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The man stood motionless on our deck, staring directly at us. We could now clearly see his expression, emotionless yet somehow prepared for confrontation. He still carried his bag, and his face appeared unwashed despite the clean river water just steps away. He was lanky but not particularly muscular. 10 minutes passed before he descended the steps and disappeared from view. We attempted to eat something while constantly scanning the glass walls, searching for any sign of his presence. It felt like being exhibited animals, trapped for someone's twisted amusement. Once we felt confident he'd left the area, we fled the small cabin from my maternal uncle's main house, sprinting upstairs to the second floor where we locked ourselves in. In this room, we finally managed to get enough signal to contact emergency services. Unfortunately, they informed us that only one patrol car served our entire township, and it was currently busy monitoring the mountain areas. My mother decided to extinguish every light, gripping the blade tightly as we strained to detect any sound that might indicate we weren't alone. Complete stillness. The quiet lasted roughly an hour. Mom kept checking the door periodically. Yes, this entrance was also made entirely of glass, allowing us to monitor the staircase leading to my maternal uncle's master bedroom. Around 2 in the morning, my mother rose for another check and froze mid-step, fixated on the stairs. She pressed so close to the glass while clutching the weapon that I momentarily feared for her safety. Her survival instincts seemed more heightened than at any previous point that night. I tried to approach the door myself, but my mother screamed with an intensity I'd never witnessed before. Despite her warning, I moved closer and peered through the transparent barrier. The stranger was positioned on those very stairs, grinning. I cannot adequately express the terror that consumed me. My mother shoved me backward and hurled her phone in my direction. I dialed emergency services again, but my mother's shouting interrupted my conversation with the dispatcher. The operator became deeply worried and promised to redirect the patrol car from the mountains, though she warned it would take considerable time. From that point forward, my mother continued screaming various things into the night, completely losing control until she suddenly went silent and whispered, "He's gone now." Before law enforcement arrived, the stranger returned to our door one final time, attempting to force it open. He appeared to be retrieving something from his satchel when the sound of approaching sirens made him flee. The officers entered the property gate just as my mother opened the bedroom window, shouting, "The intruder was up here. Catch him." The authorities searched extensively and instructed us to remain in the room no matter what. After some time, one officer returned and announced, "We've located him, ladies. We'll return shortly." I couldn't track how long they were gone, but eventually we heard their vehicle departing. Hours later, these same officers came back and asked us to come downstairs. When we complied, both looked visibly troubled. The senior officer explained they discovered the man concealed near the riverbank among rocks and vegetation. Upon searching him, they found he was heavily intoxicated and his bag contained a firearm. They also revealed they'd been hunting this individual because he'd been sexually assaulting visitors to the river over recent days. I can't say what this person's ultimate plans were, but one thing was crystal clear: his intentions were sinister. I still get haunted thinking about that Scrabble game and how it seemed to foreshadow the night's events. Needless to say, my mother and I never stayed there alone again. That face and his disturbing smile are permanently etched in my memory. We should rarely fear those who've passed on. The real danger comes from the living among us. Thanks for watching my story. Let's start another story. This haunting experience happened during the early 2000s when my family lived in Illinois. Growing up, we were passionate campers who regularly visited outdoor destinations throughout the state. Our favorite spot was White Pine State Park near Mount Morris, Illinois, a location that would forever change how we viewed supernatural encounters. During this particular weekend trip, I was approximately 7 or 8 years old, while my younger sister was around 5. Something immediately felt different when we arrived at the campground entrance. Typically, Weekends brought crowded conditions with nearly every campsite occupied. However, this time we discovered an unusually quiet park with vacant sites everywhere. Our family considered this unexpected solitude a stroke of good fortune and proceeded to establish our temporary home. Our chosen campsite sat directly opposite a sharp bend in the main campground road, a detail that would prove significant later. We engaged in classic camping traditions, outdoor games, capturing fireflies during twilight hours, and preparing s'mores over our campfire. As darkness approached, bedtime preparations began. Our family tent featured a unique 3-section design with one central area and 2 smaller side compartments. We designated one compartment for storing supplies and food, while the opposite section served as my sister's and my sleeping quarters. Before settling down, our parents distributed their standard camping safety equipment, incredibly bright military-grade glow sticks that provided adequate visibility without disrupting sleep patterns. Around 2 a.m., according to my mother's account, she experienced an inexplicable sense of unease that jolted her awake. Checking on my sister and me, she noticed my sister sitting upright in her sleeping area. Concerned, my mother quietly inquired whether everything was all right. What happened next defies logical explanation. My sister turned toward our mother and in an eerily calm whisper stated, "The devil is standing behind you." This chilling moment triggered immediate panic in my mother. Initially, she wondered if my sister was experiencing a nightmare or perhaps mistaking our father's silhouette for something sinister. However, our father remained deeply asleep beside her. An overwhelming instinct told my mother we needed to evacuate immediately. She roused our father and me, hastily packed us into our vehicle, and drove straight home, abandoning all camping equipment until daylight. The following morning brought our return trip to retrieve our belongings. The park ranger approached us, asking if we had occupied the specific campsite number from the previous evening. After confirming our identity, the ranger mentioned that the overnight staff member had observed our hurried departure and wondered about any problems we encountered. My parents shared our strange experience, and the ranger's expression visibly changed to one of genuine concern. He then revealed disturbing information that explained the campground's unusual emptiness. Approximately 2 weeks earlier, a tragic accident had occurred at the campsite directly across from ours, the same location near the road's curve. An intoxicated driver had missed the turn, crashed through the area, and fatally struck a camper sleeping in his tent. This devastating incident explained why other families had avoided the park that weekend. Following this revelation, our family never returned to White Pine State Park. Most remarkably, my sister maintains no recollection of awakening that night or making that terrifying statement to our mother. Whether this represents mere coincidence or something more supernatural remains an open question, but the experience was undeniably disturbing. If this story doesn't make it into your content, I appreciate you taking time to read it anyway. Let's start the third story. Cleveland, Ohio, 2009. I'm just 4 years old, living in our gorgeous 2-story blue house in what seemed like the perfect suburban paradise. Tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, kids playing everywhere. You know the kind of neighborhood where nothing bad ever happens. There was this amazing park just down the street where my sister and I would spend countless hours playing. Now, here's the thing about being 4. Most fears are pretty manageable. Your typical monsters under the bed, strange shadows on the wall, that sort of thing. But what I experienced wasn't your average childhood nightmare. This particular dream was so vivid, so absolutely terrifying, that 15 years later, I can recall every single detail like it happened yesterday. The dream always began the same way. I'd find myself standing alone in our neighborhood park, but something was immediately, terrifyingly wrong. Above me stretched a sky the color of fresh blood, not the beautiful crimson you'd see during a stunning sunset, but a solid, unnatural red that made my stomach drop. Dark, ominous storm clouds rolled across this hellish sky, yet there was no wind, no rain, just an eerie, supernatural stillness. Even at 4 years old, I instinctively knew skies weren't supposed to look like this. But the worst was yet to come. Through a gap in those menacing clouds, something began to emerge. As the clouds parted like curtains revealing a horror show, I saw it, the sun, but not as I'd ever seen it before. This wasn't the warm, yellow ball of light I knew. This was a massive, jet-black sphere hanging in that blood-red sky, resembling a total solar eclipse but lacking that familiar golden corona. Just pure, absolute darkness. The moment I laid eyes on this dark sun, pure terror flooded through my tiny body. It felt malevolent, evil, like it was aware of my presence and wanted to cause me harm. I frantically looked around for help, for any familiar face, but the park was completely deserted. Panic set in as I started running toward home, tears streaming down my cheeks, with this overwhelming sensation that the black sun was watching my every move, tracking me like a predator. Halfway through my desperate sprint home, salvation appeared in the form of a car pulling up beside me. My grandmother, usually the most cheerful, light-hearted person I knew, sat behind the wheel, but her expression was deadly serious. This wasn't the grandma who'd crack jokes and spoil me with treats. She urgently motioned for me to get in, and I didn't hesitate for even a second. Once we reached my house and I was safely reunited with my family, I immediately bolted upstairs to the bedroom I shared with my sister. But even surrounded by familiar toys and furniture, I couldn't shake the terror. I remember pressing my face against the window, staring up at that awful black sun, paralyzed with fear about what might happen next. That's when I'd always wake up, heart pounding. Here's what makes this story even stranger. At 4 years old, I had zero knowledge about solar eclipses, religious symbolism, or anything that could have inspired such imagery. I wasn't exposed to scary movies or apocalyptic content. One friend later mentioned it reminded them of something from the Berserk manga series, but that connection came much later in life. My mother insists I woke her up multiple times describing this exact same nightmare, though I only remember experiencing it once. Interestingly, my night terrors completely stopped after this dream, but then something else began, sleepwalking episodes that my parents witnessed regularly until those eventually ceased too. But wait, there's more weirdness to this story. A few years back, I was browsing through a local thrift store. You know, the type musty air that somehow only bothered me while everyone else breathed normally. I wandered into the taxidermy section, because apparently that's a thing thrift stores have, and tucked away in a corner, separate from the other dolls about 5 feet away, I spotted something that drew me in like a magnet. It was just a doll, nothing particularly special about it, but I felt this inexplicable compulsion to buy it. Brought it home that evening, cleaned it up nicely, and placed it right beside my bed. Now, I should mention that sleep paralysis wasn't completely foreign to me. I'd experienced it maybe once or twice in my life before this doll entered the picture. That very night, I woke up in complete sleep paralysis. For those who've never experienced it, imagine being fully conscious and aware but completely unable to move or speak while feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and often hallucinating terrifying presences in your room. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me through this long story. Special shout out to Midnight Confessions if you're reading this. I know it got a bit lengthy, but I appreciate you taking the time. Whether this was all just sleep paralysis creating false memories or something more supernatural, it felt completely real and utterly terrifying in those moments. As I glanced across the room, there was an elderly woman trying to quiet a weeping infant on the adjacent hospital bed. For some unexplained reason, that porcelain doll appeared to be staring directly at me. I'm unsure whether this was simply my sleep paralysis playing tricks on me, or if I had accidentally repositioned it while tossing and turning. Needless to say, I immediately closed my eyes and drifted back to sleep because I wasn't willing to stay conscious and discover what might unfold next. The following morning, I had to return to my mother's house and decided to take the antique doll along. I positioned it on a bookshelf opposite my bedroom and ensured it wasn't oriented toward me. I can't explain why, but I couldn't shake this persistent sensation that unseen eyes were constantly watching me. My sleep paralysis episodes became increasingly frequent after that incident. Nothing particularly dramatic occurred, just the typical inability to move while being engulfed by complete blackness. Approximately 1 week later, I experienced my most terrifying sleep paralysis episode to date. Upon awakening, I didn't immediately recognize I was trapped in paralysis. Consequently, I stood up and approached the bedroom door, only to watch my hand pass completely through the doorknob when I attempted to grasp it. Glancing back toward my bed, I observed my own body lying there peacefully before mysteriously returning to my sleeping position. I repeated this same action, still experiencing this bizarre astral projection, but this time I peeked outside the doorway, only to encounter absolute void and overwhelming terror. I hastily retreated into my bedroom, and upon turning around, I'm certain I witnessed that cursed doll gazing at my motionless form again. Additionally, there was now this enormous shadowy entity composed entirely of writhing limbs rapidly approaching my body. However, I snapped back and somehow regained consciousness before it reached me. I temporarily relocated from that bedroom because it had mysteriously flooded, something that had never occurred before acquiring the doll. Now I've returned to the room and I'm experiencing identical feelings of terror while constantly sensing invisible surveillance. Yet whenever I consider disposing of the doll, I'm overwhelmed by the conviction that doing so would trigger something catastrophic. Therefore, I'm completely uncertain how to proceed. Let's start the fourth story. I was about 5 or 6 years old, playing with my younger 3-year-old brother in our basement. We had this amazing indoor bouncy castle down there. Yeah, I know you're probably envious right now. While we were bouncing around having fun, my little brother needed to head upstairs for something. I casually told him to go ahead and do what he needed to do. Here's where things get weird. The basement lights started acting up, flickering on and off in this really eerie way that made my skin crawl. I was still on the bouncy castle when I heard this strange sound, like someone was attempting to communicate with me. I quickly turned off the bouncy castle to listen more carefully, and that's when I heard it crystal clear, my father's voice calling out, "Rinna, come up here." My first thought was, sure, why not? So I made my way up the basement stairs. But when I reached the top, absolute terror washed over me. My dad was nowhere to be found. I started calling out for him frantically, and eventually found him relaxing in his bedroom. When I asked him how he managed to get there so quickly, he looked at me with complete confusion. He insisted he had no idea what I was talking about and had been in his room the entire time. To this day, I have no clue who or what was mimicking my father's voice to lure me upstairs. Thanks for taking the time to read this creepy encounter. I'm hoping this story makes it into one of your videos. Hey there. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. Even though I just discovered your channel literally hours ago, I'm already hooked on your content and felt compelled to share 3 of my most unsettling paranormal experiences. I don't really have many people to share these stories with, except those who've already heard them countless times. Before I dive deeper, I need to mention something important. Every single house I've ever lived in has been haunted. No joke. When I was younger, we resided in a 2-story home where the property owner actually practiced voodoo rituals on the land. The second house we relocated to when I entered 2nd grade also had its own collection of shadow figures and unexplained phenomena. I would constantly spot this tall figure wearing a top hat wandering around our yard. What made it even more disturbing was hearing familiar voices calling my name. Voices that sounded exactly like my family members, even when I was completely alone or they were in different rooms. This constant paranormal activity made me incredibly anxious and paranoid as a child. Let's start the 5th story. The first and most recent supernatural encounter occurred when I was between 13 and 14 years old. Even though I'm 17 now and turning 18 this December, these memories remain incredibly vivid because of how deeply unsettling and impossible to explain they were. Around April or May sometime between 2020 and 2022, I can't recall the exact time frame, my mother, 2 sisters, and I relocated to a brand new apartment. We began moving our belongings during April and were completely settled by the end of April and start of May. This particular apartment was situated in one of the town's busiest areas, where locals predominantly lived rather than tourists. This spine-chilling incident happened on our very first night sleeping there after we'd moved everything in and finished cleaning. I was lying in my mother's bedroom next to her, scrolling through my phone. Her bed was positioned facing both the doorway and her walk-in closet. My older sister had just left our shared bedroom and walked into the kitchen area. Immediately after my sister went to the kitchen, something absolutely horrifying appeared. A short, pale-complexioned woman with a severely damaged, almost blurred and burned face slowly peeked her head into my mother's bedroom. She had jagged, unevenly chopped black hair cascading over her shoulders and partially covering her face. What made it even more terrifying was this unsettling smile she wore before quickly ducking back out and vanishing completely. I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't experiencing hallucinations because right after this apparition disappeared, my mother immediately asked if I had seen the mysterious lady too. I confirmed that yes, I had definitely seen her. I also knew it couldn't have been my sister playing some elaborate prank on us because my sister has dark skin, is considerably taller, and has short, thick 4B/4C textured hair, completely opposite characteristics from the ghostly woman we witnessed. My mother completely caught me off guard when she suggested I should go investigate and ask my sister if she had been the one peeking into the room. I stared at her like she'd lost her mind and questioned why she was essentially offering me up as a sacrifice to whatever supernatural entity that woman was. She made that annoyed clicking sound with her tongue and criticized me for being too frightened. Looking back now, literally anyone would be terrified to investigate something like that, but nevertheless, I mustered up the courage, got up, and walked into the kitchen to question my sister about whether she had looked into the room. She gave me this completely puzzled expression and said, "Absolutely not." I felt my fear and confusion intensify because if it wasn't my sister, then who exactly was this mysterious woman? I reluctantly forced myself to gather enough bravery to check the bathroom, which was located directly adjacent to my mother's bedroom, but there was absolutely no one there. I should also mention that the entrance to the building's maintenance access was located in that bathroom, and you couldn't enter without walking directly beneath it. That detail was part of why I was so reluctant and terrified to go investigate in the first place. To this day, I've never discovered the identity of that mysterious woman, and she hasn't appeared in my life since that strange encounter. Our home carried an unsettling atmosphere during certain moments, and being alone inside those walls always triggered this overwhelming sensation that invisible eyes were constantly observing my every move. My next supernatural experience unfolded between September and October 2016, right after Hurricane Matthew devastated the Bahamas when I was approximately 8 or 9 years old. We were residing in Nassau's rural countryside on New Providence Island, specifically in the Coral Harbor and Adele neighborhoods, positioned near the International Airport and the luxurious Albany Resort Hotel. This was actually the second residence I referenced previously, where I regularly witnessed shadowy figures and heard unexplained voices echoing through the rooms. Our neighborhood's layout was quite unique. Residential properties lined exclusively the left side of our street. The right side remained completely undeveloped, featuring dense pine forests and wild vegetation stretching toward what I believed was a gun range deeper in the wilderness. My assumption about the shooting facility came from the regular sound of gunfire that would echo through those pine trees. Hurricane Matthew had severely damaged our area's electrical infrastructure, knocking down multiple power lines and leaving us without electricity. Since darkness had settled over our community, my mother strategically placed lit candles throughout our home to provide adequate illumination. My siblings and I had gathered in her bedroom because none of us felt comfortable being separated in the pitch-black house. I positioned myself on the floor beside her doorway, right next to my eldest sister. It's important to understand our home's layout. My mother's bedroom sat at the very end of our hallway, which meant that anyone looking outward from her doorway could directly view our refrigerator and a portion of our kitchen's island countertop. During this particular moment, I found myself completely fixated on that kitchen area, staring intensely at the counter and refrigerator as if something had captured my attention in an almost hypnotic way. The experience was so consuming that even my sister, who was positioned directly in front of me, seemed to vanish completely from my peripheral vision. These stories remind us that reality can be far stranger than fiction. Which confession will haunt your dreams? Hit that notification bell before something finds you first.